All right, so the recording has begun. Yeah, so again, I'm Madeline. I'm one of the co-founders of Honeycomb Collective. I'm joined by my partner, Colin, who's the other co-founder.
Hi, everyone.
I'll just start by saying my big four are I'm a Capricorn rising ruled by Saturn in Capricorn. I'm an Aries sun and a Leo moon. And I'm really nervous. This is the first time we've done a workshop like this. So I really appreciate you guys being here. And yeah, I hope it's worth your time. That's the Saturn in me. I really hope it's worth your time. And I use she and they pronouns. And I'll hand over to Colin to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Colin. My big four are I'm a Pisces rising with Jupiter in Aquarius in the 12th. I'm a Cancer moon and a Pisces sun. Kind of a Jupiterian view of things. It'll be great. It's good to have everyone here and looking forward to it. And I'll hand over to Dave.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Dave, he, they, and my big four, I have sun and moon both in Gemini, and then Libra rising with Venus in Taurus. So the Venus in Taurus just is the only dignity in my chart. So it's my favorite part. And I'm very excited. I think it's going to be great. And you're doing great. And chat's going.
Awesome. Yeah. So I just want to remind everybody, yeah, you can definitely have fun interacting with each other in the chat. And if you have any questions that you want us to cover during the Q&A section at the end, please use that Q&A feature in Zoom. There's a button at the bottom of your screen where you can click the Q&A and then you can just enter a question in there. You have the choice whether to share your name or to enter the question anonymously. And then, then we'll get to those questions at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Not that screen. This screen. All right. So the title of our workshop today is How to Use Your Honeycomb Almanac. I just want to start by acknowledging that this meeting is being initiated from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. So the outline for today, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We just want to help you understand what our products are, what are the almanacs and calendars, why did we create them, what do they do, what do you need to know in order to utilize them. And a lot of the questions that we received from the workshop registration involved, it's like setting up routines for working with your almanac, like how to use it on a daily basis. So I'm going to spend some time covering that. And then, as I mentioned, we're hoping to have a good portion of this meeting just be an open Q&A so we can make sure that we talk about, what's most pressing to you. And so I'll hand over to Colin now to just go over a few upfront points to remember.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So throughout the webinar content, we've tried to answer many of the questions that we received. If you have a question, as Madeline said, use the Zoom webinar Q&A. Just a quick note that we'll be using the tropical zodiac with whole sign house systems in most cases, just to keep everything simple. And just a quick note that astrology is a lifelong learning process. The almanac is a tool to help you with that. And so, our goal is not to be prescriptive and say this is the astrology or this method in astrology is what you should be using. We just want to give you the data and the tools to be able to apply astrology and learn astrology as you see fit. I think the next thing, before we sort of dive into the features, it's important to highlight that there's a lot of ways of using the almanac. It's a great general reference to support your astronomical and astrological journey. It's based on NASA data. All of the information is astronomically correct as well as astrologically. As part of a regular journaling practice, the almanac provides astrological context to your thoughts and your perspectives. It's super useful for planning events or for understanding the astrological weather of events that have been planned. For example, if Mars is your malefic, contrary to sect, where it's involved, you might remind yourself to be a little less impulsive. Or on the other hand, if Jupiter is your benefic of sect and is indicated, you might choose to more go with the flow and trust your intuition. And so using the almanac to just get a feel for what's coming up when you're interacting with the world at large is really useful. It can certainly be used to deepen your self-understanding or to process specific personal experiences or events that occur in your life. They might be small or large. For example, if you're going through a difficult time, identifying transits involved can help you work out when you might expect things to improve. Similarly, you could also look for upcoming transits that may help remediate the situation and use them to help reset things. The calendar is great for casually perusing the state of play while making a coffee in the morning. That's actually how I use it. I just keep looking at the calendar and saying, oh, this event's coming up, this is happening, these transits are coming. And I tend to use the calendar much more than the almanac because it's just there and readily available and I know where it is. So yeah, the almanac is a reference tool that can be used in some or all of these ways. It's useful as a casual reference or to support a daily practice. So yeah, as we look at all the various features of the almanac, don't feel like you're supposed to be using all of them or putting them all into practice. It's however works for you, and it'll evolve over time as you go through your astrological journey. So just going to let Madeline go through. We sent through a PDF document early in the just before the meeting, and Madeline's going to walk through that and let you know what's in that.
Yeah, so everybody can see my my PDF screen here. Colin, give me a thumbs up. Great. Yeah, so we put together just sort of like a quick overview of how to get started with interpreting some of the some of the content that's in the almanac, basically, because I think as there's sometimes people buy an almanac and then they might not realize that it doesn't contain interpretations. It's like very much just a technical document. So yeah, we've taken a moment to just start to incorporate some resources here that we'll probably eventually actually piece together in the almanac itself. So you can have a quick reference to just like building your own interpretations. Like when the moon, enters a certain sign, you'll have a reference for what does that mean for yourself. This document also includes some of our suggestions for like further study, like books that we recommend for just getting into the basics of astrology, free web articles, some recommended podcasts and lectures. It also includes resources specific to interpreting transits and to learning Hellenistic astrology. And so this was sent out like whenever that was, a day or two ago, along with a link to this course. And yeah, and we'll also include it. Sorry, I got distracted because the cat is scratching at my office door. So I'm going to let her in real quick. She's a Leo. She cannot be ignored. All right, back from the cat intermission. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of what this resources document is all about. And this is version 1 of this document. We'll probably be updating it as time goes on. So I'll hand back to Colin to continue with the presentation.
Okay. Okay, that should say the ephemeris and beyond. Does that look right? Cool. Okay, so what is a honeycomb almanac and how do I use it? And the simplest answer to that question is that it's a fancy ephemeris. Honeycomb almanacs are just NASA data visualized for astrologers. So let's take a quick look at some of the features of the almanac, starting with the ephemeris. So here's an interesting section of the February 2022 ephemeris. Just taking a step back, an ephemeris gives us the position of the planets and luminaries, usually at the start of each day in a particular time zone. You can set the time zone of your almanac, and the included 12 months of ephemeris tables will use that. So that's pretty neat. This ephemeris is for Melbourne, Australia, where we're at. And an ephemeris is one of the most fundamental tools in an astrologer's toolkit. It tells you where the planets are and where they're going to be. Traditionally, astrologers would use ephemeris tables like this to draw charts by hand. So yeah, let's take a look. There's a few things to see here, especially on the 5th of February. It's showing a Sun conjunct Saturn in Aquarius, marked in blue. And it's also showing Mars in Capricorn, sextile Jupiter in Pisces, marked in purple. Now we can see here that Mars is very close to Jupiter. It's only got 1 minute to move. So we'd expect that to happen pretty soon after the day starts. We can see the Sun's got a little way to go to catch Saturn. It's about 14 minutes. And now the Sun moves an hour a day. So 14 minutes is about a quarter of a day. So we'd expect this conjunction to occur about 6 a.m. There's a couple of other pieces of useful information here. We can see that Mercury is stationing direct, and we can see that the moon is entering Aries. This is all useful information, but it's a bit tedious, and it takes a keen eye to make sure you don't miss anything. And if you want to get more accurate, you have to start thinking about how fast is this planet moving and do some math. And if you want to get exact, you're going to need a calculator. It's a lot of information, and the pieces you want are just hiding in there, and you have to kind of extract them out. And before we created the almanac, Madeline was copying this information by hand into a journal so that she could more easily reference this on a day-to-day basis. And that's actually why we created the almanac, to make pulling this information out of the ephemeris and having it available so that you could use it much better. So let's go to the first thing that we built in the almanac, which was the calendar view. And we can see here that for the 4th and 5th of February, we've pulled out all of that useful information and placed it there. We can see that Mars does in fact perfect its sextile with Jupiter just after midnight. We can see that the Sun does conjunct Saturn about 6 a.m. We can see the moon entering Aries. We can see Mercury stationing retrograde. And we've also got additional information that you don't get in the ephemeris, or that's difficult to determine. We've got the exact time of all the events. We've also got the moon transits of the moon, which can be difficult to get from an ephemeris because the moon moves so fast that each day of an ephemeris is really too granular to see what the moon's doing. We've also got some natal transits here, and certainly to use it you can't get that directly out of an ephemeris, but if you have the natal chart, then you would be looking at the ephemeris and looking at the natal chart and trying to identify which angle is matching which angles of the natal chart and what are the aspects. So it really just simplifies that whole process of using an ephemeris and looking at it in the context of mundane events like stations and ingresses, and also like getting your natal aspects happening. So just another thing that's in here, just a quick note on reading that void of course moon. It says that at 8:40 p.m. on the 4th, the moon in Pisces makes its last planetary aspect to Pluto before going void for 5 hours and 16 minutes, and then entering until it enters Aries at 1:56 a.m. the following day. And that is the definition of a modern void of course. And that's how you read it. And they're all the modern void of course markings in the almanac work the same way. It starts at the aspect right before it and ends when it ingresses into the next sign. So let's take a look at some other parts of the almanac. There's more than one way to view an ephemeris. A chart wheel is simply a visual representation of a point in time and a position on the surface of the Earth. This is a line in an ephemeris. And a chart wheel is able to represent not only the precise time, but also the precise place of your birth by showing the ascendant and the midheaven. Another way of looking at it is that we convert the time on the clock and a latitude and longitude to a set of planetary phenomena that's unique to that time and location. And that's what we can see here in the chart wheel. And a chart can be drawn for any time and place. It doesn't have to be a natal chart. You could draw it for your solar return or a full moon or an important meeting. And Madeline will be spending some time later in the presentation talking about the natal chart and how you can read it and understand it. So now below that chart image, we've got another view that we call a chord diagram. It lays the planets and luminaries and points of the chart above in degree order, starting with the earliest degree and going through to the latest. So in this chart, the chord diagram quickly tells us that Venus is the earliest degree, followed by Mars, and that Jupiter is in the latest degree, just after Mercury. And that ordered information can actually be quite difficult to pull out of a chart quickly. If you were to look at the round chart and said, which order is everything in, you might be like, oh, okay, Pluto's at 6. Oh no, Mars is at 3. It's quite difficult to see. So the chord diagram makes understanding the degree order of all of the planets in your chart much easier to consume. And so let's see how that's useful. Here's that chord diagram again. Now, the first useful thing is it shows us the order in which natal planets may be aspected as a transiting planet moves through a sign. So when a transiting planet reaches 2 degrees, 23 minutes of any sign, we can check if it makes an aspect to Venus, the first planet in this natal chart by degree. Then shortly after, it may aspect Mars. And as that transiting planet moves through a sign, you know which order, if there is going to be an aspect, these planets will be aspected in. So we're going to actually take a deeper look at the last 4 planets in this chart. And that's Uranus at 2720 in Libra, Saturn at 2748 in Gemini, Mercury, and then Jupiter at 2909, and both of those in Aquarius. The almanac also includes a transit overview diagram, which gives a view of transits over time. This is in contrast to the calendar view, which only shows the exact time of aspects. This view shows you the approaching aspect and the trailing aspect with an incoming orb of 2 degrees and an outgoing orb and a separating orb of, so applying orb of 2 degrees and a separating orb of 1 degree. And this gives you a chance to understand when is it close and when should I be thinking about this aspect. Yeah, this view can be a bit overwhelming at first. It contains a lot of information, but once you get used to it, it can be a really good starting place to get an overall feel for the year. We've taken a little snapshot of Saturn here going through just before it ingresses into Pisces, right at the end of Aquarius, which is those late degrees are where those 4 planets that we saw in that timeline above, in that chord diagram above are. So what we can see here marked in red is that we've got Saturn on the left, and it will be making in time order, it'll be making a trine to Uranus, a trine to Saturn, it'll be conjuncting Mercury and then conjuncting Jupiter, and it'll do that in the space of about 2 weeks, which is pretty quick for a slow moving planet like Saturn to be going through aspects like that on your natal chart. And towards the middle of the diagram, you can see the 2 degrees as it comes into Uranus, makes its aspect, then it quickly makes an aspect to Saturn, and you can look in the timeline, and that's in the second half of February, all of those get made. And so the reason we call it a chord diagram above is because it's easy to see what order these things and how clustered they are. And we're looking here at Saturn's transit of this area, and it's like strumming a musical chord on a guitar. And what we're seeing is that these 4 planets in different signs are tightly connected by their close degree. And it's really important to note that this native will experience this sequence in quick succession with every planet that transits this degree throughout their lifetime. The moon will play this chord every month over just a few hours. And so that flavor of experiencing a Uranian transit, a Saturnian transit, a Mercurial transit, and a Jupiterian transit like that is repeated throughout the person's life with every planet that transits that part of the chart. And it's not that easy on the circle diagram to exactly see what's transited when and which comes next. So another way of thinking about it is this entire chord diagram could be seen as a series of notes. And as a planet moves through a sign, this native experiences the planets in this order as with their aspects. So one thing to note is that not every planet is aspected on every transit. So we can see an example of a dropped transit. So with Saturn there, after Jupiter, the next one it makes is actually Mars, the square to Mars, just below that red box. Now, Venus comes before Mars. Where's Venus? And the reason is that Saturn in Pisces is inconjunct Aquarius, which is where Venus is. So it doesn't form an aspect when it's in Pisces, and it'll move straight to the square to Mars. But in general, this is the order in which you would expect transits to be impacting your natal chart. Phew. So that section was pretty heavy, but we saw how the almanac really just takes ephemeris data and visualizes it. It makes it easier to see things over time and in time and understand the motion of the planets in relation to each other and in relation to our natal chart. So let's look at a couple of other features before we hand over to Madeline, who will talk some more about how to approach all this information in useful ways. Okay, the planetary movement diagram shows the path of the planets through the zodiac for a particular period of time. So at a glance, you can see where each planet will transit over the period. It gives a good visual feel for the relative speeds of the planets too. We can see Pluto out on the outer edge. Over the course of an entire year, it kind of does a little retrograde, a little direct, and moves slightly forward. It's a slow planet. But then we can see Mars does a transit, half the zodiac, and Venus and Mercury transit the entire zodiac. And so the speed of planets is really, really obvious here. This diagram is oriented to your natal chart. So this diagram is included in the almanac of a Pisces rising because we've got Pisces on the first house. This orientation makes it much easier to see how the transits might affect you personally. For example, Jupiter, the ruler of Pisces, spends the majority of its time in the native's first house of Pisces. And that sounds important. Having your ruler transit its house of domicile, and it's the ruler of the chart, and it's the first house. And it's easy to see what's going on in each of the houses of your natal chart. As another example, we can see that towards the end of the period, Mars will station retrograde in the native's fourth house of Gemini and spend a lot longer period than normal, highlighting fourth house topics. Another useful table is the summary list of new and full moons for the year. It shows both the mundane and natal aspects that the moon makes at that moment. Mundane aspects are shown in grey and natal aspects are shown in blue. Let's take a look at that total eclipse in May on the bottom right there. We can see that the moon makes a square to Saturn and a trine to Mars and to Neptune. We can also see that it is trine the natal moon and sextile the natal Pluto. Now, if you choose the lunation charts plugin, then your almanac will also include the chart of every one of these lunations, showing all of the mundane aspects. So let's look at that lunar eclipse in more detail. So here is that lunar eclipse for a particular location. We can see that square to Saturn, which is pretty tight given the thickness of these lines. On our chart diagrams, the heaviness of the lines indicates how tight the orb is. And here we've got Saturn at just coming up to 25 degrees and the moon at 25:18. So they're only 22 minutes apart. That's a really tight square. And we can also see that the trine is actually a conjunction of Mars and Neptune here over in Pisces. And this is a really interesting eclipse chart. So that one other thing while we're looking at this chart is that a chart like this helps us understand the actual sky from that position on Earth. In this Sagittarius rising chart, all of the planets except the moon are below the horizon and would not be visible from this location. The ascendant and the descendant mark the horizon. And the eclipsed full moon over here in Scorpio is just starting to rise right after sunset and would be visible from this location, rising over here. Lunation charts can be a really excellent way to develop a deeper understanding of the mundane astrological environment. And I just wanted to quickly mention the monthly overview page. Most of the things on this page should be familiar. It's got a monthly transit diagram similar to the yearly one we've just seen. It's oriented to your chart. We've got the lunations of the month, the stations that occur that month, showing mundane and natal aspects, all the key mundane transits for the month, ingresses, and outer planet natal transits. And if you have the digital PDF, then this can be a great page to print out once a month, just to have everything at a glance right there. Yeah, so, okay, I'm going to hand over to Madeline now to start talking a little bit about creating routines with your almanac. Madeline, you're muted.
All right, I was muted. I was basically just rambling, saying thanks so much, Colin. That was great. So didn't miss anything there.
So inside the magic box, we're actually in the same place.
Different rooms of the same house. That's, yeah, pretty lucky in that regard. So just while we're on the vein of technical check-ins, can everyone see my screen? Cool. Okay, so how do we bring all of this together? A lot of y'all mentioned in the registration responses that you might just be a little bit overwhelmed with how much data there is in our products, and that's super understandable. Like, all of the planets are moving all of the time. There's just so much information to take in on a yearly basis, on a daily basis, etc. So I'm going to walk you through some ideal questions to ask yourself, some ways to focus on, how to even choose which things to focus on so that you're not trying to interpret everything all the time, which is an unmanageable task. So first of all, it's helpful to just identify, like, what are your goals with studying astrology? What types of astrology are you most excited about learning? Because, like, the almanac is a very neutral tool. We've kind of just presented the data. You can choose to add the Hellenistic plugin if you're really studying Hellenistic techniques, but you can essentially use the data that the almanac presents to study any type of astrology. For instance, if you're interested in evolutionary astrology, you might be paying very close attention to, like, the transits of Pluto or the transits of the lunar nodes. If you're the traditional astrology nerd, you'll probably de-emphasize the transits of the outer planets, and maybe you'll be focusing on how do malefics or benefics, affect me. And so I can see that there's a hand raised at the moment, and I'm just going to let you know that we're not going to be pausing to answer questions during this portion. So I just encourage you to use that Q&A feature and type your question there, or else throw it in the chat and Dave can help you out. But yeah, if you throw your question in the Q&A, we'll get to it at the end. So moving along, you can also ask yourself, like, how do I really want to apply astrology to my daily life? Am I trying to understand what's happening all the time with every planet, or are there certain qualities of astrology that are going to be most helpful for me and my personal goals? Like, am I trying to, attract a romantic partner, or am I trying to just be a better partner in my life? In that case, I might be looking at transits to my 7th house or transits from the ruler of my 7th house. Am I trying to build a better awareness of my moods from day to day? Maybe I want to pay really close attention to the moon, because the moon can really set that emotional tone. So yeah, just like ask yourself those questions and then refer to that resources document that we sent you to get a feel for which planetary archetypes represent each of these goals that you might have. And another question to ask yourself is just like, are you even the type of person who enjoys journaling and taking notes? If you are, then that's great. The almanac has space for you to just every day write some high level notes about what's happening in your life that you can refer to and compare to the transits. If you're not that type of person, then kind of the wall calendar is a good solution, because then, as Colin mentioned, whenever you're noticing that you've had like a weird day or a special moment, you can just pull up your calendar and take a glance to see what transits are currently in play. So that's just to kind of set your expectations for yourself, that there are many ways to interact with your almanac or calendar, and there's not a one size fits all approach. But here, just continuing on, I think when you're thinking about which transits or which planets to focus on, because the almanacs and calendars are targeted towards your personal natal chart, like a good strategy is to just get really familiar with who are the key players in your natal chart. For instance, in this chart, there's a Capricorn ascendant. So Saturn is the ruler of the chart. It's the ruler of the ascendant. And, no matter what your rising sign is, the ruler of that rising sign is really going to say a lot about you, your health at that moment, what you're currently paying attention to in life, depending on where that planet is currently transiting. And so I kind of recommend, if you do just one thing, pay attention to whatever is happening with the ruler of your ascendant. Like, who is currently transiting that same sign where your ruler lives, who is opposing it from the opposite sign, etc. And then the next, I think, most important planet to pay attention to is going to be the moon, because the moon it's just the regulator of day-to-day activities. It represents your personal physical and emotional needs. Pardon for that computer noise. That's the moon giving an alert that you need to pay attention to it. So yeah, if, in this chart, for instance, whenever a planet is transiting Leo, or is even transiting the other fixed signs that, the signs that square Leo or the sign that opposes Leo, this person is going to probably feel extra moody or notice that their emotional needs are, more prominent than at other times. So identify where the moon is in your chart, and then just look out for transits to that area. And I would argue that the moon, paying attention to transits to your natal moon, is even more important than your sun, because while the sun represents your overall identity, your sense of self, your self-actualization, your accomplishments, like those are things that are, it's important, but it's kind of like a nice to have. Like, we all want to accomplish something with our lives, but if we're struggling to just meet our physical and emotional needs because something's going on with our moon, then that kind of takes a priority. So yeah, just to take a look at a different chart, if you have a Leo rising or a Cancer rising, then, because those signs are ruled by the sun and the moon, you can see how they're playing double duty. So that can kind of help streamline your focus. You might consider yourself lucky in some regards that you have fewer planets to pay attention to. So in a Leo rising chart, the sun is both the ascendant ruler, and then of course it also represents the sun's usual significations. So you can see that in this chart, the sun and the moon are located in the same sign. So this particular person will definitely want to pay attention to transits of Taurus and transits of the other fixed signs to see, when the major chapters of their life are playing out. And of course, whenever planets are transiting other Earth signs, they might find that there's that beneficial trine-based energy to help them along in their life mission. Yeah, so then if you feel like you really got the hang of that and you want some more advanced focus for your transit tracking, you can pay attention to the other key players in the chart, which are going to be the rulers of the other angles. So in addition to the ascendant, which our glyph is for the ascendant is here, you have the opposing sign, which is the descendant, and the planet that rules the descendant. In this chart, that's Saturn, because the descending sign or the seventh house is Aquarius. So if this person wanted to know what's going on in the world of their partnerships, both romantic, platonic, or business or otherwise, just for them in particular, Saturn is the planet that represents their partners and partnerships. So whatever Saturn is up to at that point in time is going to help them understand what's unfolding for them in the realm of partnerships. And in addition, they might want to pay attention to, anytime that planets are transiting Aquarius, for instance, in March, we know that, we know if we're looking at our calendars, that Venus and Mars are going to be entering Aquarius together, forming a conjunction. So, this person will probably be paying attention to that and thinking about what that might imply for their partnerships. And in addition, because the ruler of their partnerships is based in the fourth house, in Scorpio, rather, they'll also want to note just when planets are moving through Scorpio and activating that ruler. So that, again, that's a bit more advanced, but if you're at that level with your studies, start paying attention to the other angles and transits to and from those rulers to see what's going on in these 8 areas of your life. So once we've established which planets we've chosen to pay attention to, we're going to go ahead and look at just get an idea for the big picture of the year. I think it's helpful when developing your routine for working with your almanac to just sort of start big and then narrow your focus to the transits. So as Colin mentioned, this planetary movements diagram for the year that's at the front of your almanac or at the back of your calendar, if you're looking at the wall calendar, this can, it's like a cool perspective because it's oriented towards your rising sign. So you'll note here that this Capricorn rising native can see from their perspective what's going on with each of the planets this year. Because this is a whole signs chart, they can pretty clearly see whether or not Pluto is finally going to fucking make it out of Capricorn. Looks like no, not yet. Okay, maybe next year. They can see that Jupiter is crossing through 2 of their houses this year, etc. And then, of course, because they're a Capricorn native, they'll want to look at what kind of progress is Saturn making. So when you're looking at this page and you're paying attention to, maybe you're listening to your favorite astrological forecasts for the year ahead, this is a good area to take notes as they're talking about, say, the Mars retrograde in Gemini later in 2022. It'll be nice to hone in on, all right, which area of my chart is that? Here is Gemini in the 6th house. So this person will see a focus on 6th house topics when Mars spends that really long time in Gemini. And so what else do I want to say about this? Essentially, as Colin pointed out, these overview tables are going to show you aspects to both mundane and natal placements within a 3-degree orb on either side. So if you're noticing that any of these retrograde or direct stations are making a close aspect to one of your key players, like the ruler of your ascendant or your sun or moon, you can go ahead and highlight that for yourself. And it's not very easy to see on, I'm sure, this small Zoom screen. But for instance, Jupiter is stationing retrograde in Aries for this person. It's making a conjunction to the natal sun. So they will probably highlight that and think, oh, okay, this year Jupiter is going to spend an extra long time talking to my sun. What do I imagine that is going to play out for, for me in terms of my, my solar qualities, my goals, my what do I want to accomplish, what do I want to be seen for, etc. So another big picture that you'll want to take for yourself is to look at the eclipses for the year. And so if you're listening to an astrological forecast or reading something that gives you an overview, they're probably going to talk about which signs the nodes are transiting, the nodes of the moon, rather, because those will, the lunar nodes are going to determine which pair of signs the eclipses will be occurring in. And so when you're looking at natal transits, it's really important to realize for yourself where that pair of signs falls in your chart. So if we're looking again at the Capricorn rising chart, the current eclipses this year in Taurus and Scorpio are going to be falling in the 5th house of Taurus and the 11th house of Scorpio. So since eclipses represent major changes, beginnings and endings, sort of like unpredictable portals of new experiences, this person can stop to think about like what kinds of changes might be coming, or how can I prepare myself for changes in terms of my 5th house creative offerings, or my children, or my sex life, other 5th house topics. And since the South Node is transiting the 11th house of Scorpio, they might think, so what's going on with my 11th house topics, my friends, my hopes and aspirations? How can I prepare myself to maybe release some old expectations in those areas of life? And then, of course, again, just taking note, are any of these eclipses, in addition to the lunations, but especially the eclipses for the year, are they going to be aspecting any of your key players? If so, then, highlight that date in your almanac and take notes on how that plays out for you. So moving on, this is a weird title. What's the dominant flavor in this meal? The idea here is that the meal is your year, and the dominant flavor is what current outer planet transits is your natal chart receiving, regardless of whatever else is going on, what the astrological forecasts might be saying. Your chart is unique, and the outer planets such as Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus might be making aspects at that time that nobody else knows about, because it's just it's your chart. So it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but here's Pluto conjunct the ascendant, and Pluto conjunct Mars. Here's Chiron conjunct the sun. So these are like once in a lifetime transits that are occurring at this point in time for this native. So regardless of what Jupiter is doing or Saturn is doing, etc., this person, it's important to keep in mind, like, oh, Pluto crossing the ascendant, that doesn't even happen to everybody in their lifetime. That's happening now. It's a multi-year experience. So, interpret that as you will. But this is why I think it's super important to look at this page in your almanac and try to pick out at least conjunctions to your natal planets, or at least the aspects to your sun, moon, and ruler of ascendant, as well as the degree of the ascendant itself, to see what the major storylines are for you at this time. And then, if you're comfortable with that, you can move on to thinking about what's Jupiter doing, what's Saturn doing. As Jupiter moves relatively quickly compared to the other outer planets, Jupiter is going to be kind of zooming through and trying to uplift and encourage some places in your chart. So if you're looking for where might I be feeling more optimistic this year, it can be helpful to just take a glance at who is Jupiter going to be talking to in my chart. So then once you've kind of gotten that big picture, you can move on to working with your your weekly routines or your monthly routines, etc. So I recommend setting aside time if you can to just look at that monthly overview page, get a sense for when the lunations are going to be occurring, what are the major mundane transits happening this month, what dates do the planets ingress different signs, and then see if any of those events are happening this week. So, as I mentioned, a big feature of March 2022 is that Venus and Mars are ingressing Aquarius on the same day at, relatively speaking, the exact same time. So once we get to that week in our almanac, we'll want to pay attention to, here in this Australian time zone that this almanac is set for. That's happening on March 6th. And because this is a Hellenistic plug-in almanac, the transits to the Time Lord Venus are being highlighted. But yeah, just start out the week by looking at which major events are happening this week. And then my other tip is when you're looking for natal transits that might be perfecting in the week, it's helpful to take a look at this page, which is included sort of at the top of each monthly section. So rather than scouring through the daily exact aspects, this page is going to give you this sense of this 2-degree applying orb. The tick mark is the exact moment of the transit perfecting, and then this 1-degree separating orb. So you get a feel for just sort of like, the full range of days that you might be feeling one of these aspects, as well as being able to track down the exact moment. So I know a lot of people find this view like not super intuitive to read. So I recommend kind of flip back to the beginning section of the almanac, which explains the diagrams and how to read them. And and then we'll keep working on trying to make everything as these data visualizations as intuitive as possible. I'd say everything is a work in progress, and we do appreciate your feedback when it comes to these things. So moving on, another thing you'll want to do during the week is check out what the moon is doing, because the moon really sets the vibe for everything else. It activates other planets. If you'll pardon me just a moment, I have another cat issue. Yeah, he is okay. Yeah, so just saying, as the moon ingresses different signs, that's going to be activating different sections of your chart. So in this week, we can see as the moon enters Aquarius, you'll want to think about which houses of my chart are covered by Aquarius, and so where naturally are my sort of like daily activities and energy is going to fall. And as the moon makes its aspects to other mundane transiting planets, that can really set the tone for the day, especially if there's a long time between these aspects. Like Colin was mentioning the void of course notation. So like on this day, March 1st, you can see that the moon it's made a conjunction to Saturn, and then it's moving quite a long time, or it's taking a long time, over 18 hours before it ingresses the next sign, and and even longer than that before it makes another aspect to another planet. It's like a whole day before it talks to Uranus. So this to me says that these few days here are going to feel kind of heavy. Whenever the moon conjoins Saturn, it has this close conversation with Saturn where it gets to know, what is Saturn concerned about right now? Where does Saturn think that we're not working hard enough, etc. So when I see something like that, I will, try to remind myself to, don't be too hard on yourself at this time, especially if you're an overly Saturnian person by nature. And just remember that the moon moves quickly, this vibe will pass. So another good routine is at the end of your week to take some time to just make sure you've written notes for what's happened each day, and just like kind of work backwards to see if you can teach yourself about transits in retrospect. So if you found that you've gotten into a lot of like arguments and accidents, for instance, that's usually something that's a domain of Mars. So, look at that week. Has anything been going on with Mars? If you found that you were running into a lot of synchronicities, or you like met really interesting and exciting people, you're feeling super inspired, has there been a transit to Jupiter? If it was a busy week of socializing, et cetera, as you get familiar with the archetypal significations of each planet, then it's just kind of cool how you can, with taking notes each day, you can sort of, like I said, backwards teach yourself based on what happened. What do I then think each of these transits meant, and how can I now move forward and predict things in the future? And so then, like with all of this wonderful structure and routine that you've built, when it comes down to the day-to-day, really all you're doing is just taking notes. As much as you can, what happened in your life, exactly what time did it happen, what were you feeling, and just you can occasionally open your almanac to refresh yourself about which transits are happening that day. But essentially, you're just trying to build a record for yourself, because over time, as you keep learning and studying, you're going to be super grateful that you have all of this self-generated data about what various transits, like how they play out for you personally. So I think that's really the goal with the almanac, is just make it easy for you to do research and to incorporate things on a day-to-day basis. So in conclusion, as you've seen, astrology is a lot. It's a lot of information. It can be a lot to keep track of. So you're doing a great job. And you don't have to keep track of all of it. Just choose a few areas to focus on to get started. It's also important to remember that your natal chart is unique. So when you're reading or listening to general forecasts for any period of time, they're not going to be able to cover the nuances of your exact placements. So you kind of like take things with a grain of salt and remember that, Mars or Saturn are not the same for everybody. Jupiter and Venus, they're not the same for everybody. The certain signs that planets are transiting, that's, there's a way to interpret that on a mundane level, but then bringing it home to which area of your life is that happening. That's a process that, you need to go through yourself. Or if you're able to, really recommend setting aside money for booking one-on-one consultations with professional astrologers. That's going to be a huge help as you learn and get familiar with your natal chart. Even if you feel like you've been studying astrology for a long time, just having an extra pair of eyes on your chart it's always going to teach you things. So yeah. And then also, if you're able to join Astro community spaces where you can connect with other peers. Ascendant assemblies is a really cool project that's just gotten started in the past year, where people of the same rising signs can get together in Zooms and compare notes about how different transits are affecting them based on their shared house structure. So yeah, get out there and connect with people. And that concludes that.
That was great. Thanks, Madeline.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for bearing with us. Not bearing with us. Sorry, I'm so Saturn. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion now.
Yeah, I can start with that and just have a look at some of the questions that we've got here. TV has asked that I understand that the PDF planner is available, but I'd like to see the calendar as a PDF. Is that going to be coming soon? The answer to that is yes, that is going to be coming soon. We should have that out in the first half of this year, all things working out. So Yeah, that's that. TV is also asking, will you offer customers the option to have no artwork in their planners calendars for those who want to use the blank space for notes instead? That's a really great idea. We've had one other person suggest that instead of artwork, they want to include the monthly planetary movements, which was also a good idea. So we'll definitely be reviewing the options that we've got for the calendar. It didn't occur to us that people wouldn't want artwork, but customer feedback is great. So got another question here from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any idea what percentage of your customers employ astrological magic to create talismans? And what features in your products are most useful to help them? So we don't know how many people are using our almanacs to make magical talismans, but we imagine that people are. Certainly, if you've been following Austin Coppock and Caitlin's business Sphere and Sundry, that's something that they really get into. And the almanac would definitely support that. It'll give you indications of what time in the year or the month or when would be a good time to find a Jupiter energy or a Mars energy, depending on what kind of talisman you want to create. So I would definitely say just being able to identify the time and using it as a planning tool for doing talisman-based magic would definitely work. We've got a question here that's specifically like, what does Saturn conjunct Vesta mean?
Yeah.
We're going to focus on the feature.
I was going to say, I can mention that briefly since we don't have too many questions. Sorry to interrupt there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so we won't go into too many of these sort of like how do you interpret something, because that's sort of what the resources are for. But we didn't include the asteroids in the resources, so it's worth just noting. So Vesta is one of the asteroid goddesses that's generally thought to represent, it's the goddess of the hearth, the keeper of the flame. So in the natal chart, Vesta represents something that you're like spiritually devoted to, or something that you think is so important that it's worth just kind of dedicating yourself to. Vesta can also indicate, because it represents the traditional or the ancient Vestal virgins. It's this idea of kind of like not letting anybody else distract you from what's most sacred to you and being a servant to that. So if you're thinking about Saturn making an aspect to your natal Vesta, if Saturn also represents commitment and discipline and focus. So my interpretation of that would be that it's a good time to sit down and think about what your long-term goals are for your personal spiritual practice or your devotion. And then if we're talking about a mundane transit of Saturn conjunct Vesta, it's probably something similar, but maybe in a general framework for everybody thinking about reflecting on the topics of devotion. So thanks for that question. The next question is, will we go over the zodiacal releasing plugin with some examples? I do have some slides prepared for that. So I want to take some, if we've got time, I want to, go into that a bit more, but we might just shelf that for just a second as we go into some of the other questions, which I'll hand back to Colin for that. And you're muted at the moment.
Sorry about that. Jen's asking, I love the artwork, but additional pages for notes would be awesome. So the almanac itself, you can add additional note pages, but we don't offer that yet on the calendar. I think the main reason is that the pages in if you've got a calendar, you'd know that the pages it's a very thick card, very glossy. It uses premium ink, and every page in the calendar is actually quite expensive to produce. And when we publish a blank page, they still charge us the same amount. So the cost of the calendar gets quite large if we're just getting them to use this high gloss, thick card just to show blank pages. So we might add it, but the cost to add note pages to the calendar would probably be higher than most people would imagine. But it's definitely something for us to think about. That's for sure. So we've got a question from Lois. Oh, and Dave's actually just typing an answer, but I can quickly jump into that. Are the bold transits personal? I have the calendar. Personal transits are in blue. Moon transits, which are there usually a lot more of those, are in a light gray, and the bold gray or black transits are all of the other mundane transits apart from the moon. So if you're looking for natal transits, then they're personal and they're blue, and everything else is a mundane transit, and they're dark, printed in dark unless it's the moon, and they're a bit lighter just to make sure they don't crowd out the other information. Let's see.
I guess someone asking to flip through the almanac to show the layout and what's included without plugins. Is that something that I should briefly do? I've got one pulled up, like a digital almanac.
Sure. Yeah, if you're feeling like doing that, that'd be great.
Just do that quickly to sort of show the yeah, what's the the chronological order of the things.
Yeah, great.
As they are called. Things and stuff. Okay, so we're able to see the kind of I've set up a split screen view here. Okay, so yeah, what I've done here is just showed two almanacs that are for the same person but with different plugins. The one on the right is without the Hellenistic plugin, is kind of the main distinction, and the one on the left includes the plugin. Yeah, so the beginning of the almanac has just your table of contents, then it goes into a couple of pages that just introduce you to the
Madeline.
pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say they were specifically saying, can we look at it without plugins?
Oh yeah, so maybe just the one on the.
Yeah, just the one on the right, maybe.
Okay, I did want to just maybe quickly show the difference in the natal chart between the two plugins.
Oh,
so
yeah, that does make sense, actually.
It kind of helps. Yeah, so it's the one, so let me see. Yeah, the one on the right, you can see there's no decans or bounds. This is without the Hellenistic plugin, so the chart is a little bit simpler. And then the Hellenistic plugin, sorry, this is kind of trippy. But then the page facing the natal chart and the Hellenistic plugin is going to show you this technical chart analysis based on traditional assessment of planetary dignity and debility, whereas the natal chart without the Hellenistic plugin is going to give you this elements and modalities graph, which there was a question about that in the Q&A, I think, that I noticed. So might just actually dive into that a little bit while we're here. So just to kind of quickly summarize that, it's a graph that we've created according to a relative point system assigned to the major players in the chart. So the sun, the moon, and the rising sign are worth 4 points in this chart, whereas the other traditional planets and the nodes are worth 2 points, and then these remaining pieces are worth 1 point each. So it's based on the distribution of where planets are falling in the elements, especially. It's easy to see at a glance, just holy shit, this person's so earthy. With a solid quarter of their brain being dedicated to fire and a bit of water and very little air. So it's just kind of a fun at a glance reference to the elemental composition primarily of the chart. And then to the right here, these, if you refer to the glyph key, these are our glyphs that we've designed for cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And then the traditional symbols for fire, earth, air, and water. So this matrix just kind of helps you pinpoint how many cardinal placements do I have? How many fixed, how many mutable? And then again, which placements are falling in each element. So yeah, and then just to maybe like, I don't know how tedious this is actually to just like flip through the rest of the PDF, but following the natal charts, they're the solar return charts if you've included them. And then we get into the overview graphics like the lunations, the planetary movements for the year, the retrogrades, these outer planet timelines. And then I'm going to switch to this. Let's see. And then you start moving into the monthly sections. So if you're viewing your PDF as like a single page view, then the calendar can kind of be confusing because it's like, here's the left side of the page, and then here's the right side of the page. Of course, if you're printing this, these will be two facing pages where the monthly calendar is side by side. There's that inner planet transits timeline I was mentioning, and then you get into your week by week. Most of the rest of the almanac is just going to be this kind of data. And then once you get towards the end, we have just kind of scrolling through the ephemeris, and any extra appendices or plugins that you've added will fall at the end. So I hope that kind of helps give you some context if you haven't seen the almanac before.
Yeah, that's great. I will answer another question here. Laura Lee is asking, on the outer transits grid, can you darken the lines between the months? That was suggested in the chat and would be helpful. Or list the months at the bottom as well. Yeah, I think they're great ideas, especially putting the months at the bottom. There's a little balance in the lines to make, like, whether they stand out too much or too little. If they're too dark, then it becomes a bit of a heavy grid to view. But yeah, we'll look at darkening those a little to make them a bit easier to see. Brian's asking, could you add the elemental composition to the Hellenistic version? It would be nice to have. Yeah, I think that was a kind of a tough decision, which is about space in the almanac. So with every natal chart and solar return chart, we have 2 pages currently, either with a Hellenistic analysis of the chart or an elemental analysis. But I do agree, it would be nice to have sort of 3 pages if you've purchased the Hellenistic version. So we'll look at maybe how we could do that. It'll add an extra sort of, it'll make it a little harder to lay out the almanac. So it's nice, you just open it and there's your natal chart, and then you open the next page and there's your solar return chart for 1 year, open the next page. But if we've got 3 pages, then that becomes a little awkward. But yeah, we'll definitely think about that. The reason we switched them out was partly that, and partly because they're both an analysis of the natal chart, and the Hellenistic one is certainly a more comprehensive one that they used in those times. So yeah, that's so we've got Belinda asking, in the future, will you be offering progressed planet transits or solar arcs? Yeah, we're considering putting that information in. There's definitely a lot of astrological methods and processes that could be suitable for the almanac, and part of it is just finding the time to implement all of them, and others is keeping the almanac approachable and not being, like just every feature under the sun, and actually ordering an almanac takes a really long time because there's just so many options to pick from. But yeah, we do think progressed planets especially might be a good view for us to have when we can get around to that, for sure. Let's see. TV asks, putting in a request for a back pocket for the calendar. Yeah, that would be amazing. With our printing, we're kind of pretty limited to who we can get to print the almanac. If we look at that print process for a bit, every single item we print is unique. So first thing we need is a printer that's prepared to print 1 copy of a book. and lots of them. That's not every printer's favorite thing to do. So that narrows our options. And then it's finding a printer that's able to print and ship internationally at an affordable price. And that narrows it down again, because essentially to ship at a reasonable price, it has to be printed near to where that's being shipped. So we need a printer with a European capability, an Australian capability, a US capability. And it really limits our options. And the current printer we've got for the calendar doesn't offer us the ability to put any features like back pockets into the calendar. But if we could start putting features like that in, we'd probably jump at the opportunity. And we're always paying attention to what options we have for printing a product that we'd prefer to print rather than that's available with that printer. So let's see, I'll just clean up some of those questions that I answered.
Okay, I was just going to mention we're coming down to the last 15 minutes or so. And I know we did have a lot of questions about zodiacal releasing in the registration form. So I was wondering if I should get into some of those slides here. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds great. That's a good idea.
Okay, so we'll just do that. I think it's something that we basically need to do more like a workshop just on zodiacal releasing, to be honest, because it's a pretty heady subject. And of course, if you haven't already, check out some of the resources in the document that we shared for just like podcasts and lectures and whatnot that can help you. So it's not really something that can be grasped without kind of getting that bigger picture of like, what does it mean? Where does it come from? How are the people who've been working with it for several years, how are they working with it? But I can go over what we've built in terms of tracking zodiacal releasing in the almanac. So the main idea with zodiacal releasing is that there's like a narrative arc that's playing out in your life that's happening in like multiple levels of time simultaneously. No big deal. So depending on which lot you've chosen to release for the purposes of tracking in the almanac, you're going to be focusing on stories of relationships and partnership dynamics, as is the case if you're really releasing from the lot of Eros, which is Venus's lot. You might be tracking your career or your accomplishments and recognition, which would be the lot of Spirit or the Sun's lot. Or if you're tracking the lot of Fortune itself, that's the lot of the Moon. So that's more like health issues and things like circumstances that you might fall into, because Fortune is, it's sort of this concept of like luck or chance. And so releasing from Fortune can kind of show, are you in a very just where are the cards falling for you at this point in time? So in general with zodiacal releasing, just, in my personal trying to get the hang of it, I found that sometimes it can be hard to figure out how the story is playing out like in real time and easier to piece it together after the fact. So that's again where just taking notes in your almanac comes in handy, because as you're starting to I know some people who really work with zodiacal releasing, they'll literally build spreadsheets for themselves where they're just writing down, here's all of my Pisces periods for the year. And okay, so I'm taking my notes from my almanac and I'm putting it into this spreadsheet to see what happens whenever I'm in a Pisces period. The almanac primarily can just help you organize your notes in that way. And then, so in this, just to explain this diagram a bit, you've got these multiple levels in which the releasing periods are happening simultaneously. And basically the level 2 is like zooming into this highlighted yellow level 1 period. And then this period that's highlighted on the level 2, the level 3 is like zooming in to look at that. And the peaks and the valleys and whatnot are all related to which signs in your personal chart are angular from the lot of Fortune. So in order to understand sort of like interpreting the zodiacal releasing periods for yourself, it's helpful to look at this graph that we've included, which is your natal Fortune angles, sort of breaking that down for you. So whatever sign contains the lot of Fortune itself is a peak period, and peak period just translates to like just busy. Events and experiences that are happening in that time in your life are busy relative to your chosen releasing topic. So again, if I'm tracking periods related to Eros, if I'm noticing that I'm in a zodiacal releasing period that is Virgo, in my chart, that contains a lot of fortune. So the Virgo times are going to be busy for Eros significations. And then the other point to keep in mind is that it's the signs that are angular. So the signs that are of that same modality as a lot of fortune that are also busy or peak periods. And then the other key point is that paying attention to the sect of your chart and which planet is the contrary malefic, which planet is the benefic in favor. These are going to influence the flavor of those periods in your life. So as you're moving through, if you're this person and Saturn is in a cardinal sign, and the cardinal signs are the follow through or completion periods in zodiacal releasing, you can predict that after a busy period, when it comes to following through or implementing plans, this might be the challenging part of your storyline because the cardinal signs are angular to Saturn. By contrast, the portions in time where you're building up, where you're getting new ideas, you're starting new projects, you're meeting new people, because the benefic in favor is in the fixed signs, the preparatory periods, those might be the easier times for you. And just to compare to a different chart, those planets can fall in any places. So this person happens to have both the contrary malefic Mars and their favored benefic Jupiter in the same sign in the follow through or completion periods. So, sometimes that's how it feels in a person's life. Like both challenging things and helpful things are happening simultaneously. So it can be rather complex. And so for zodiacal releasing tracking, building a routine into that, it really comes down to that reflection period at the end of your week, taking a minute to think about like what was the narrative in whatever storyline I'm trying to pay attention to. Like, was I just working a lot this week? Was I partying a lot? Was I, mostly happy, mostly depressed? Just taking that snapshot view of your point in time, and then trying to connect them with the level 4 periods that are happening on every few days. And again, if you're sort of building out your big picture, you're going to try to connect these periods with other points in time where you've been in the same period. And that's about it's the best that I can do in a span of 10 minutes to talk about zodiacal releasing. But feel free to keep letting us know if that's something that you want to you sort of like workshop some more in the future.
Perfect. That's great. So we're getting close to time, but I thought there's a couple more questions here that I should be able to answer pretty quickly. Kathy's asked, if I've ordered before, did you save my natal chart data, time, place, date, etc., for easy ordering now? We don't currently do that, but we expect to have our website improved throughout this year, and that's one of the things that we want to make easier for you. So watch this space on that one. Okay, let's see. Kathy's also asked, does your website describe what's included in a basic almanac and what plugin options one can add? Also, can you order a larger page size so the print is larger? So as you're ordering your almanac, it will start with mostly no additional things selected. The only one that's selected, I think, is solar returns, because they're free, and most people, that doesn't confuse the almanac in any way. It just adds a couple of charts. So yeah, you can, if you don't select any plugins, then you'll see that at the summary. It'll say you've added these and you haven't added these. It should be fairly clear what plugins are there. It's in terms of how specific we are about what's in there. Yeah, each option should tell you what is in that plugin if you were to add it. But I think we probably could do a better job of providing some detailed information about what's in each plugin, maybe with photos on the website, and say, a page for each plugin so that it's really clear what's in them. And that website, that kind of website update will be coming this year as well. And the second part of that question, yeah, you can order a larger page size, and the print is a little larger in the wide version of the almanac. So good question there. Let's see. Let's see. Do you see any others in there that you want to catch before we close out now?
Yeah, I've just noticed that there's the question about planetary speed, which is another some of that like bonus content that I'd prepared slides for. So we could like look a little bit at that.
Sure.
Okay, we'll do that. Basically, we made like a bunch of slides and then saved some in case they seemed relevant. Yeah, so planetary speed, these are mysterious diagrams come, with your almanac without any explanation, like many other things. The basic idea is that aside from the sun and the moon, which never retrograde, every other planet at any given point in time is moving at a relative pace that's either like faster than average or slower than average, and is either increasing in speed or decreasing in speed. This is just a snapshot, like how we got this information or how we personally started thinking about planetary speed was based on the work of Demetra George in her amazing textbook, Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice, Volume 1. I recommend reading that book if you're curious to know so much more than even planetary speed. Yeah, so the breakdown of these diagrams can be found in the beginning section of the almanac, where essentially blue indicates that the planet was moving direct at that time, and orange indicates that it was moving retrograde. If the colored bar is close to the stationary point, then the planet was moving very slowly and even either preparing to station retrograde or direct. If the arrow is pointing to the right, it indicates that the planet is increasing in speed, etc. So how to interpret that? Demetra in her textbook covers this idea that if at the time of your birth, a planet was moving near its like top apparent speed, then that planet is more able to implement its agenda in your life, just like perhaps at a younger age or just in general. It's just easier because that planet is moving so quickly that archetypally represents like you moving quickly with the significations of that planet in your life. So in this chart example, you can see this person's Venus is just like moving fast and getting even faster, really close to maxed out speed. So in that person's life, Venus is just like, it's one way of indicating that Venus is pretty beefed up and able to do Venusian things. So this person is, probably pretty gung-ho to attract friends and lovers, or to, satisfy their pleasures, to have fun, to have a good time. Venus is just, real loud, you might say, in that regard. Whereas by contrast, this person's Saturn is moving retrograde and is near the top end of its retrograde motion. So that can indicate that in this person's life, Saturn takes a long time to get going, which is kind of a funny pairing when you say that like, oh, they're very Venusian. Venus is able to manifest its significations quickly, whereas Saturn takes a long time. This kind of paints the portrait of a person who really likes to have a good time, and it's going to take a while for them to maybe learn how to, settle down or mature. It's just kind of like a quick way to interpret that. And then on the mundane sense, our calendars will show you this snapshot for each month. So it's just another quick way to get an idea for whether or not a planet is, here Pluto's about to station. So like a visual way to get an idea for how quickly or slowly a planet is moving. Oh, and then natally, if a planet looks like this, like this Pluto looks, that's thought to be a special emphasis. If a planet's stationed retrograde or direct, within a few days of your birth, then that planet is just like, it's stopped right there in the sky. And so for better or for worse, that planet has a special emphasis in your life. So great.
That's great. I'll mark that as answered.
Great.
There's
Question about the perfections. A couple of other questions here and there. Now we're sort of we're kind of at the end of time, but I don't mind going a few minutes over if we want to get into anything else. Do I have a slide about perfections? Yeah, I do have one slide about perfections. Should I do that?
Yeah, why not?
All right, why not?
Good.
Okay, so annual perfections. If you've added the Hellenistic plugin, you're going to get this mesmerizing chart, which again, it's helpful to kind of study a bit more to get the full context, because we can't quite teach you how to use this technique. But in short, it's a really helpful way to focus again on transits for this particular time period. Because the way that it works is that for each age of life, from age 0 onward in cycles of 12, one sign or one house is going to become emphasized in your life. So when you start at birth, the first house or the rising sign is emphasized. And when you turn 1, the second house is emphasized, and so on, in multiples of 12 for as long as you live. So in this chart, it's indicating that the person starts this almanac time period at age 33, and then during the course of the almanac, they turn 34. And so the perfection is moving from a Venus-ruled 10th house year into a Mars-ruled 11th house year. And so they'll notice throughout their almanac that after the date of their solar return, you stop seeing transits from Venus highlighted and you start seeing transits from Mars highlighted. The reason why I have this little pop out here is because, in addition to like the Lord of that sign itself being emphasized for the year, that particular sign itself is emphasized. So in 2022, we have the eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. And so since this person is having a Scorpio perfected year, I've just called out that they, it's sort of like this doubling up of emphasis in Scorpio for their year. So the fact that there are eclipses happening in Scorpio while they're experiencing a Scorpio perfection just kind of emphasizes that, like, all right, be prepared for some big personal events in the realm of 11th house and 5th house topics. So yeah, it's essentially that. It just helps you focus a little bit more on what to expect for your personal year. And just to quickly answer, TV says, are annual perfections and zodiacal releasing related? And the answer is no. They're completely independent techniques that don't inform or speak to one another. They're both included in the Hellenistic plugin because they are, kind of recently revived ancient techniques. So we've just included them together. And in the future, we might have the option to sort of pick and choose. Do I just want perfections? Do I just want zodiacal releasing, etc.? But at the moment, it's just like your bulk package deal.
Yeah. And to be fair, the Hellenistic plugin doesn't really add a huge amount of complexity to, like, there's a couple of extra diagrams which you can skip if you're not enjoying them. Now the main place that it makes a little more complex is the natal chart. It adds 3 items to the chart itself for the main lots of Eros, Spirit, and Fortune, and it also marks the 4 less common lots outside the chart on the natal chart. It adds the decans, but it's not a hugely complexifying plugin. So it can be fun to get it and see, if you're just using it to look at events or plan or do things, it can be useful to just have that information marked up. and see if you're noticing any correlations or whether those techniques seem to mean anything to you.
Mm-hmm. And I thought I would just mention as well, because I remember in the registration form, some people were asking about the planetary conditions. And so I can just like kind of quickly cover that too, which is just that we've with any of the natal charts or the solar return charts in the Hellenistic plugin, you'll get that table that looks like this, that gives you a sort of a summary of the quote unquote condition of each planet. And so that information is directly, like we developed that with some consultation from the authors of these, primary, or not primary, but sorry, these books here, Demetra George and Chris Brennan. So for the almanac itself, we haven't provided a lot of context as to what these things mean. So I kind of just want to say, like, go read those big fat books if you want to learn more about it. But I can summarize what we've chosen to indicate. Just essentially the blue or the very supportive conditions for a planet are just going to be covering essential dignities like domicile and exaltation. You'll get a blue indication for a planet if it's in mutual reception with its domicile lord, if it's in its own bound or triplicity rulership, and if it's experiencing any technical conditions of bonification. And essentially, so we've prioritized those as very supportive, and then anything else that's nice falls into this category of just generally supportive. So this is sort of like, there's no particular order to this. You could argue that the sun being in an angular house is like actually pretty important for its condition. But this is just kind of, it's no particular order. This is just listing some nice things that support the sun enacting its significations for this person. And then the very challenging conditions are going to be essential debilities, like if the planet is in its detriment or its fall, and then conditions of technical maltreatment. So for instance, the sun in this chart is experiencing the technical condition of being overcome by Mars and Saturn, which is just simply means that Mars and Saturn are in a superior square by sign to this sun. And so that's just technically a difficult signification for the planet because it has to, sort of like, it has to work against the agenda of Mars and Saturn, the malefics, in order to enact its significations. And then the other challenging conditions in the red outline are just everything else that's not great. The sun being ruled by a malefic, like, kind of challenging, even if it is the sign of the sun's exaltation. So this sun kind of gives you a good idea of like how a mixed bag any general planet might have when you're assessing its condition. It might be like, yay, my sun is exalted, it's in Aries, but then, oh, boo, it's being maltreated by Mars and Saturn. So this can kind of help you give a realistic sense of just how nobody's chart is perfect. Everybody has their blessings and their misfortunes, generally speaking. So I think that's all I have to say about that. Okay, so we're 8 minutes past, and
just going to read one more question about the annual perfection since you were there.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's asked, is the annual perfection for the natal chart or the solar return chart? So it's for the natal chart. It's based on your age, and every solar return, your perfection moves forward by one house. So when you're born, you're in for the first year, you're in a first house perfection. And then on your first birthday, you go into a second house perfection, and it just keeps going through like that. So your solar return is an important time because that's when the perfection changes. But which perfection you're in is based on your age. So that's that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we need to wrap it up because I need to pee. And and we want to let you all get on with your day. But it's really amazing that you you showed up for this. I was super surprised by the response that we got in offering this workshop. And it says to me that, y'all would like to see more of these types of offerings in the future. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I hope that obviously there's a lot that we want to do with Honeycomb beyond just making you some really handy planners, including more community events and community platforms. So just, stay tuned to our newsletter or our social media to see, what we've got cooking for the future.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I'm just reading some of the chat comments here. Really appreciate you guys. It's very sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I'm just reading them some more. This is my Leo moon time. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording. Yeah. Thank you guys again.